Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today, and in today's episode, we have 529 College Savings Plan Basics. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. As always, we really appreciate it. Before we get into today's episode on 529 College Savings Plans, I have a few quick announcements. Number one, this will be the last week to become a premium subscriber for just $3 a month and be entered into our Q3 $25 gift card giveaway. And if you guys that have been around for a while remember from last year in Q4, we also opened up the pocketbook quite a bit, and I think we actually did 4 $25 gift card giveaways to our premium subscribers. So if you'd like to support the show, you appreciate the fact that we don't currently have any ads on the show and you don't have to skip around, you like what you hear, and you want a few additional benefits that you can read about, just click the link in your show notes description that talks about becoming premium today. You can read more about it, and as long as you become a premium subscriber basically by the end of September, so before the next show airs, then we will, I take that back. The next show will air on September 30th. So you have until then. So when we do the October 7th show, I will announce the winners at that time, or the winner, I should say, for Q3 at that time for the $25 gift card. And then when we get into later in the holiday season, we'll probably open it up again and give away quite a bit more. And again, anybody that's a premium subscriber is eligible for that. So that's the first announcement today. The second announcement is we have one new country listening to the show in Albania. So thank you to our new listeners out in Albania. We appreciate it. And then the third announcement, this one's kind of funny actually. So the third announcement, we have a new review that came in recently on Apple Podcasts. So just a quick shameless plug for those of you that have not reviewed the show yet, especially if you feel like we've earned 5 stars, we would appreciate a 5-star rating and review. This one comes in from Lisa Foxy. The title, and they gave us 3 stars out of 5. So we no longer have a perfect 5 out of 5 star rating. They dropped us down to 4.9. But they gave us a 3 out of 5 star rating. And the title says, Foul Language. The review says, helpful information, but the host's language is distracting. I can find solid financial advice from another podcast and listen with my children in the car. Didn't need to know about his bathroom habits. So thanks, Lisa, for the honest review. I got a few pieces of feedback for you. Number one, when you first go to download the show or click on an episode to listen to the show, we specifically mark every single episode as explicit. And also, the intro tagline to the show is, thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. So as soon as you hear that, that should be your cue. Maybe I don't want to listen to this with my children in the car. I don't know you from the next person, but you appear to be maybe one of those people that, buys their kid one of those back in the day music CDs that has the parental advisory explicit lyrics sticker on it, a big fucking black and white sticker, and then you just give it to your kid anyway, and you're surprised when they're not just singing Jingle Bells on there and they have a couple F-bombs here and there. So we're not for everybody. I knew the day would come where we would get a less than a 5-star review, and unfortunately that day has come, but it is what it is. We appreciate the feedback. If you don't like the show, and the funny thing is when I read this, I was actually on the shitter, Lisa, if you're listening to the show still. So I thought that the irony of the whole thing was kind of funny. But we like to keep it light. We like to have fun here. We do cut up. There is some vulgarity to the show. We're very upfront about that. I've had different people tell me over time they have mixed feelings about it. it's part of the brand. It is what it is. So hopefully you can choose to stick around and have some fun with us, and just know that you may not want to listen to the show with your kids in the car. Otherwise, I guess don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. But thanks for the review, and without further ado, we'll get into today's episode. So today's episode, again, is 529 College Savings Plan Basics. I don't believe that I've done one of these before. My initial plan was to have a show where I got on here with a buddy or two of mine that are also financial advisors that have some kids, and also me being a new parent myself. I thought it would be interesting for us to kind of talk about our methodologies and philosophies on college planning and saving for kids, for their college, for their future, and accounts that we like to use or not. And that may still come at some point in the future, but I've been holding out in hopes that we would be able to get that together. It hasn't happened yet. So I'm just going to go ahead for today's episode and just talk about 529 College Savings Plan Basics. And I'll tell you a little bit towards the end of the show, I guess, kind of my thought process on this and what we are planning on doing, at least at this point in time. So let's see here. So for 529s, I pulled an article recently from Investment News, and this article, it dates back a few months. It actually came out on May 20th. And they talk about essentially a survey that was done with a financial services firm called Edward Jones. Some of you may have heard of them. And another firm called Morning Consult. And basically one of the intro lines of this article states that, there's, quote, a gulf of ignorance among U.S. adults around them being 529 college savings plans. So they did this survey at the end of April of this year in 2024, and it was over 2,200 people that they surveyed. And basically, of the folks that they surveyed, everybody was over the age of 18. They don't give specifics on the exact demographics or age groups, but they said that the results found that half of the respondents do not know what a 529 plan is, and less than a quarter of the respondents actually use one. So 50% basically of people don't know what a 529 college savings plan is, and less than 25% of them actually used one. And so the primary obstacle, according to their report or article here, in terms of them, an adult opening a 529 plan, is that they thought it requires substantial savings or substantial income. So before we get into that, I just want to start off by saying, I've had a 529 college savings plan long before becoming a parent. In fact, the reason that I started one back in the day was there was another family member who had a child, and I was trying to encourage them to start one. And I basically said, hey, at the time I was not married yet. I didn't have any children yet. And I said, if you start one, I'll start one. And there was a promotion going on at the time. I think if you had put in $25 a month, the state sponsor, which we'll talk a little bit about how all that works here in a little bit, they were going to match $25 into the plan. So we both started them around the same time. I started it with $25 a month, literally had $0 in there, not married, no kids. Put $25 a month in the event I ever did get married, in the event I ever did have children. And I also at the time was thinking about, well, what if I went to graduate school? I could actually use this for myself. And so I wanted to just open with that just to make sure people realize that you don't actually have to have, a shit ton of money in order to start one of these things or to put money into these things. And so for those that are still like, all right, cash flow king, get to the point, what the fuck is a 529 college savings plan? Here we go. So the contributions that you make to this, in a lot of ways, think of them similar to those that are familiar with a Roth IRA, right? So you're putting contributions into this account. The money in the account basically grows tax deferred. And then when you go to withdraw money from the account, those distributions, which would be called qualified distributions if they are qualified, would be tax-free if they're used for certain qualified educational expenses. So think about things like tuition and fees and books and room and board and, supplies, things like that, right? So that's essentially how it works. Now, there is no tax deduction at the federal level, right? However, some states, depending on the state that you live in, there may be a state tax deduction by making contributions to this plan. So you want to double check and see, and I'll give you some resources or a really good resource at the end, but you kind of want to poke around and see, all right, what's out there? what state do I live in? Does my state have a state income tax deduction if I make contributions to a 529 plan? And what's the best plan going to be for me based on where I am and what I'm looking to do, right? And there's different ways you can go about evaluating that. So these plans historically were primarily used for college or higher education expenses, and we're not here today on today's show to debate the merits of going to college versus not and all that good stuff. We've probably talked in bits and pieces about some opinions on that in prior shows, and maybe we'll do another one someday that goes more into detail about that. But no matter how you feel about any of that, we're just going to talk about the benefits of these plans today, right? So there were some things that changed relatively recently in recent years, and you can actually, a lot of people don't know this, you can actually use up to $10,000 a year from a 529 college savings plan to be used for K through 12 tuition. So maybe you're paying tuition, maybe you're sending your kids to a private school, for example. You can use up to $10,000 a year, and anything you take out of the plan, including the growth or the earnings, would be completely tax-free. I'm not sure if I said that on the first part. So that's the big draw, right? You put money in, the money gets invested, the money grows tax deferred, and then if you take it out and use it for the right reasons, for the right purpose, then everything that comes out is tax free. And that's really the similarity with the Roth IRA, whereas you can get money out tax free. Also, for post-secondary education, so we mentioned college, but also things like vocational schools, certain foreign institutions, trade schools, like you can use the funds in these plans probably for more than you might otherwise think that you could. We already talked about the fact that these are going to be state-sponsored, and a lot of states will have tax deductions for anyone that lives in that state that contributes to that state's plan. Again, you're going to have to do your homework on that. We're going to talk today about these college savings plans, these 529 plans. Some states also have prepaid tuition plans where you basically are paying in advance and locking in the price. That's not as common, and we're not really going to spend any time on that today, but just know that that is out there. It might be something that you want to look into. As far as contribution limits, this is also something that's going to vary by plan. I would say, generally speaking, most people probably don't have to worry about, well, what's the maximum that I can put into this? Like there's no, for example, if you had like an IRA or Roth IRA, right, for 2024, the contribution maximum for anybody under age 50 is $7,000 a year. Well, the 529s don't have anything like that, so there's no annual contribution limit per se that can go into the account, but they do typically have maximum account values or maximum values to which you can continue to make contributions. And that's going to vary. Most people don't need to worry about this, quite frankly, because they're not going to have enough fucking money to worry about it in there. It's sad to say. But if you are somebody that is planning on contributing, and we'll talk in a little bit about ways that you can actually have other people like family members and friends and so forth, if they want to also contribute to that 529 college savings plan, if you're planning on building it up to a sizable amount, you may want to know what those maximums are. And they're going to vary by plan. Generally speaking, they're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000. So once the account reaches that value, then no new contributions would be allowed into that particular plan. However, the money that's already in there can still be invested and grow beyond that amount. So it's not like you're just going to lose growth above that amount. You just can't keep pumping it. One thing that's actually really cool, and I've done this and I'm about to do this again. I actually meant to do this before I recorded today's show, but I just didn't get to it yet, is you have a lot of flexibility with changing beneficiaries on a 529 plan. So let me back up and say, let's say this, okay? So I'll use myself as an example just because it's going to be, I think, easier to articulate some of this stuff. So as I mentioned before, I started one of these things with $0 in it, right? $25 a month. At the time, I wasn't married. At the time, I didn't have any children. And so I was the account owner. I started the account. I owned the account, and the owner controls the account. I was also, at the time, the beneficiary on the account. And so, like I said, I didn't know, am I going to use this for grad school? Am I ever going to have a child or not? And if so, like there was no way for me to know that back then. I don't know what the child's name is going to be, right? That's all in the future. So I had myself listed as both the account owner and the account beneficiary. So the owner controls the account. The beneficiary, as the name says, is pretty much who the funds are going to benefit or who the funds are ultimately going to be for. And one of the really nice things about these 529 college savings plans is the fact that you can change the beneficiaries over time if you want to. So I knew, even listing myself as owner and beneficiary initially, that if I ever had a child or children, I could change the beneficiary at a later time. And even before that happened, something really interesting that I was able to do was a family member was finishing up a 4-year degree, and I think it was a birthday gift. As part of their birthday gift one year, I said, you know what? I don't know that I'm ever going to get married and have kids. All right, I had had this account open for a period of time at that point. I said, I'd like to go ahead and just pay for one of your classes. And so I was able to change the beneficiary from myself to that family member and process a qualified distribution for that family member where everything was, tax-free as far as that goes. And I was able to pay for their course completely tax-free. Well, later on, then I did get married. And we just recently, you might be able to hear her in the background. We actually recently, we did have a little baby. We had a girl. And so now I'm going to be changing the beneficiary to our daughter on that plan. And you can continue to do that. So these 529 plans are very flexible as far as that goes. So some people worry about like, hey, what if my kid doesn't go to school? Or what if the funds aren't used? Or ... fill in the blank. Another thing along the same lines on the flexibility standpoint that's worth mentioning, and this is very, very new with Secure Act 2.0, and that is you can now there's a 529 college savings plan to Roth IRA rollover that's available on these plans. And so what that means is, let's say you were going to have one child and you're never going to have any other children. You don't have any nieces. You don't have any nephews. You don't have any aunts or uncles or anybody else that's in the family that you're going to, change the beneficiary to that's going to need these funds. And you say, well, if my child doesn't use these, then what, right? And the answer is any growth or earnings, if you don't use them for qualified education expenses, then you do have to pay taxes on the earnings, and then you also have to pay a penalty on the earnings, right? So that can sting a little bit. And a lot of people are hesitant to put money into these plans because of that reason. Like, what happens if my kid doesn't need it? What if they get a scholarship? What if they don't go to college? What if? Well, there's a few different things that come into play with that. There's some ways, I'm not going to get into it today, but if they do qualify for certain types of aid, there are ways to still distribute funds that are basically approximately equivalent to the amount of the aid without having a negative impact. The other thing is, and where I was going with this, is that this 529 provision now allows you to do a 529 to Roth IRA, essentially transfer or rollover for the beneficiary. So let's say that I change the beneficiary on my plan from myself to my daughter, our daughter, and she doesn't end up using the funds for whatever reason, okay? Well, we can still kind of start and sort of supercharge in a way her retirement savings by moving those funds, and there's some strict rules around this, but we can move a portion of those funds. There's a $35,000 lifetime cap into a Roth IRA. Now, we can't do it when she's super young, right? We have to wait until she has earned income or wages and would otherwise be eligible to open a Roth IRA on her own. So maybe when she's a teenager, for example, maybe she's working part-time and she could otherwise open up and contribute to a Roth IRA on her own, okay? Well, that would be a time where, depending on how much she's earning, we could go ahead and start this process of making a transfer or rollover from the 529 plan into her own Roth IRA. Now, again, there are some strict rules on this. I'll rattle off a few, but you're definitely going to want to do your research. Don't think you can just click a button and just lump sum dump the account, because you can't. Right? The 529 has to be open for at least 15 years. You cannot use any funds or earnings, any contributions or earnings within the past 5 years. Like, you pretty much have to have it in an ideal world open as a long-term college savings vehicle and be contributing to it for a long time, and then actually have it turn out that, you know what, the child's probably not going to use this, and so we want to do something else with it. And then there's kind of a safeguard or trigger with this Roth IRA rollover, right? Because they want people to have a way out and a way to do something else with these funds, but they don't want to just create a loophole for people to intentionally do this. Now, in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, hey, I'm going to put a little bit extra in this thing and still stay within the state limits over time, right, in terms of the maximum aggregate limit on the account, and maybe quote unquote overfund it so that you have a portion that's still going to pay for college, for example, but you also have a little bit extra in there that you're going to use to start contributions into their Roth IRA. And you've kind of started that process in advance. So again, there's some rules to that. They have to be eligible to contribute anyway. They are subject to the annual contribution limits of a Roth IRA, which in 2024, if you're under age 50, is $7,000, right? And so this will probably change because the contribution limits are indexed for inflation each year. But basically, if they were to stay the same, you would be able to take $7,000 per year from the 529 once a student is eligible, assuming they had that level of earnings, and move it into their Roth IRA over a period of 5 years. So you would do $7,000 in the first year, you would do $7,000 in the second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, and by the end of the fifth year, you would have moved that $35,000 out. That's basically how that would work. So it is kind of flexible, and that's actually something that made me personally quite a bit more comfortable with putting money into this plan or these types of plans. And again, I'll talk more towards the end about kind of my and our strategy and how that would work. But it's something where if she doesn't need the funds for whatever reason, you're not stuck. You're not going to have to pay the tax and the penalty on the earnings to get the money out. But again, if you were to quote unquote overfund it or put too much into it, and you got into that situation where you weren't able or willing or had anybody to change the beneficiary to, well, unless they change the rules, you're still going to, quote unquote, only be able to get out $35,000 over time. So you still may end up with a residual balance, potentially a very large balance in that plan. That's something to think about as you consider your strategy. And that's something that we've thought about in terms of, okay, how are we planning on funding this and to what extent are we planning on funding this? And I'll get to that here shortly. So another thing, let's see here. We're not going to talk about this today, but for those that really want to geek out on this, you might want to look up Dynasty 529 plans. We're pretty much in a very, very good spot financially, and you essentially want to create sort of a perpetual tuition machine, if you will, and essentially have this cover multiple generations. You do have to be thinking about things like gift tax and generation skipping transfer taxes and stuff like that. You want to typically find somebody that's going to be focusing in the college planning area and can walk you through that. But that is something that's out there that people are looking at, so that's something to be aware of. The other thing that's a little simpler as far as gifts go, so a lot of these providers, including the one that we're using, you can actually generate and send out a link to family members and friends and whomever you want to for them to make contributions to the plan. And they can, click on it, put in their information, and everyone's different. I think the plan we use is a $25 minimum that they can contribute. So like they can't put $5 in it, right? It's a waste of fucking time, right? But they can do 25, they can do more than 25. Every plan might be a little bit different. Maybe there are some that you can do $5 out there. I don't know. But a lot of people, us included, will probably be of the mindset like, hey, we got a lot of shit around the house anyway. We got a lot of toys and we're going to buy them toys and stuff. But if you want to contribute something towards their future, here's a quick and easy way to do that. And so we make contributions to it every month. We've increased our contribution a little bit since we've had our daughter. But we're not going crazy with it yet because we know that chances are family members and or friends may want to make contributions, and that's an easy way for them to do that, and that's fine. We don't want to go balls out on just the 529 plan and end up in the scenario that I described just a moment ago where you have this massive plan, and then if it's not needed, you can only move a certain portion of it to the Roth IRA, right? We want to have a nice sizable balance, but we don't want to be overly crazy about it, as far as that goes. So that's something else to keep in mind. As far as the gifts go, anybody can, and again, anything we say on this show, I should have started by saying this, but I'll say it now here in the middle. We don't give any tax advice on this show. We don't give any financial advice on this show. We don't give any legal advice or any advice at all on the show. Everything we do is for entertainment, for education. As what's her name? Is it Lisa Foxy or something? Let me go back to my notes here. Lisa Foxy. As Lisa Foxy is well aware, I like to talk about taking shits and like my bathroom habits and whatever else I got going on, just to have some fun. So this is a show. I'm just some dude on a podcast. Yes, I happen to work in the industry, and yes, I happen to be licensed and credentialed and all that kind of stuff. And I may be a financial advisor, but I'm not your financial advisor. So keep that in mind, and take everything you hear here with a grain of salt, and feel free to do your own due diligence and research, consult your own professionals before you make any decisions. Okay. Now, with that said, the annual gift tax exclusion for 2024, I believe, is up to $18,000 a year. And one of the things that's kind of cool and by the way, the lifetime gift exemption is huge. I don't remember what the actual number is, but if you were to give somebody as an individual more than the $18,000 in a given year, then technically you would need to file a gift tax return, talk to your tax advisor about that, and it just counts against your lifetime gift exemption amount, which is a fucking colossal number anyway, so it really wouldn't matter. It's just a matter of extra paperwork. But one of the cool things about these college plans is that you can actually do a 5-year accelerated gift. So maybe somebody wants to front load a plan, right? So if you can do $18,000 per year, well, in 2024, you can do, and this has been true for years now, you can do basically a 5-year accelerated gift, right? So if you take $18,000 a year times 5 years, that's $90,000. If I'm doing my math right, you can drop $90,000 as an individual, not to say you would want to necessarily, but you might, into one of these plans as a gift and still not have to worry about the gift tax return thing. Again, talk to your tax advisor, but that's really cool that you can do a 5-year accelerated gift. And as long as you're around for the next 5 years, then that works out just fine. If you were to pass away in fewer than 5 years, then it gets a little bit complicated, and we're not going to get into that today. So just know that that is something that's available. Another thing that was interesting, and this was true when I had opened this way back in the day, just kind of thinking ahead, there were a lot of people that would caution clients against having a grandparent-owned 529 plan. They would instead say the parent should own the 529 college savings plan. Why is that? Well, back in the day, before very recently, the distributions would have to be timed so that in an ideal world, you would want to take out the distributions from a grandparent-owned plan typically the last 2 years of a 4-year college degree. So you would want to wait generally until around junior year to do that because of the 2-year look back on the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, because they would look at any distribution that came out of it. And I think back in the day, they counted like 50% of the amount of the distribution as a gift and essentially as a child asset. So if somebody pulled $10,000 out of a grandparent owned 529 plan, then $5,000 of that, 50% of the $10,000, $5,000 would count against the student and they would receive potentially that much less aid, right? So those were the old rules on the FAFSA starting in December of 2023. So for the 2024 and 2025 school year, which is pretty much like right now, there's some new FAFSA rules in place that are supposed to make it a little bit easier. And one of the big changes that were made is the fact that grandparent-owned 529 plans and distributions from said plans are no longer counted against the student or against the child or grandchild. So that's a really good thing. The parents, the parental-owned 529 plans, which in this case, ours happens to be because Cashflow King started it when he was, again, single, no kid, and now he's married with a child. Well, it's still a parent-owned 529 plan, and that part didn't change. So parental-owned 529 plans, distributions that come out of that, for example, and account balances that are in that area, there's I believe it's 5.64% expected family contribution, or EFC, meaning that it counts very minimally against the student or the child, whereas the grandparent-owned 529 plan under the current rules would not count at all. Now, does that change in the future again? I don't know. Maybe. Will they eventually say, hey, you know what? That's not fair to the parents. What about people that were doing this planning and the parents owned the accounts and they didn't do the grandparent-owned accounts because they knew that? How do we put this on an equal playing field? Fuck it. We're just going to say, hey, you know what? We're not going to count it against anybody if it's a parental-owned account. The hell with the 5.64. We're just going to leave it alone. Will they do that? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But the way that it works now is technically, if you were to start a 529 plan, depending on your family dynamics and your family planning and all that sort of thing, if you had the choice and you could say, hey, do we want this owned by us as the parents, or do we want this owned by one of the grandparents, for example, you would probably go in the direction of having it owned by the grandparent. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the owner of the account controls the account. So if it's owned by the grandparents, they control the account. They control who the beneficiary is. They control how the distributions are flowing. Same thing with the parents. If the parents own the account, they control the account. They control if the beneficiary gets changed. They control the distributions and what that money gets used for. If Cashflow King wants to buy a fucking Lambo and Cashflow King owns the account, even though the beneficiary is Cashflow King's daughter, Cashflow King can take the money out and do what he wants to do. Now, am I going to do that? Of course not. But, so those are some considerations and things to be thinking about. But there are some differences between parent-owned and grandparent-owned 529 plans. And again, I say all that to say, if you have a 529 college savings plan that's owned by a grandparent, it used to not be the best planning idea. It really doesn't matter anymore. If you have one that's owned by the parents, it was really not that big of a deal back then. It's still really not that big of a deal right now. right? That's the takeaway in my opinion. Now, some colleges, private schools, for example, still use something called the CSS, which is more detailed. It's about double the number of questions. They really try to dig in and get at your details. If you have grandparent-owned 529s, it still could factor into that, but it doesn't factor into the FAFSA. So, again, this is meant to be a basic show and a springboard to put some information out there, give you the crash course, give you the cliff notes, give you a resource, and then for you to go ahead and do your own due diligence and resource and see how it fits into your own life with your own family. Okay. Going back to the survey here, I'm sure it's no surprise that there are some colleges and institutions now where it costs over $90,000 a year to go to school. Not in all cases, but according to the investment news article here, that's what they found in that survey. And so 60% of people that they surveyed said, hey, they don't feel like they're saving enough to meet these future education expenses. 1/3 of the parents that are saving for a child's education use a 529 plan, but there's others that rely on personal savings, scholarship, other types of aid. So those are kind of some findings from that survey. Those are some things to know about the 529 plans. One other thing that I'll say, and I mentioned at the beginning, is in a little bit of, kind of what we're doing, what I'm doing, and that doesn't really mean anything to you necessarily, right? So you got to do what works for you. But I'll just give you a little glimpse into kind of our thought process on this. And everyone's going to be different. I know for myself and for my wife, it was very important, or to our parents, that we came out of undergrad with no student loans, which was a huge leg up for us in terms of getting started and getting things going. And we've had that conversation and decided that we want to do the same for our daughter. And if we have any more children, we'd like to be able to do the same for them, to be able to set them up so that they graduate from school, at least from undergrad, and they don't have to worry about having student loan debt hanging over their head, because it just cripples so many people. We could go on and on about that. Your views on that might be different. Your situation might be different. You might agree, you might disagree. I don't really fucking care. I'm just telling you kind of, our thought process. And so it is important to us to have that taken care of. And again, one of the core staples in the strategy is a 529 plan. And as I mentioned, I started it way back in the day. It is a parent-owned plan in this case. We don't have any plans to change that. We'll likely continue to be a parent-owned plan. And, folks can make contributions into that if they'd like to. So that's kind of component number one of the three. Just looking at kind of future expenses when we get into the, high school / college / higher education or future type of expenses. So that's one staple. The second thing that I don't think a lot of people think about, and initially it's not really something that I was thinking about, quite frankly, and that is having another account that has a lot more flexibility than the 529 plan. Even though, as we've talked about on today's show, there are some safeguards in place. If you end up with more money in a 529 than you realize that you're going to need, like the Roth IRA rollover, for example, there are some things that can be done, but even still, we want an account that had just maximum flexibility. And the other thing is we like being in control. There's other plans and accounts out there that you can use. They're all a little bit different. I don't really like a lot of the other ones for different reasons, whether it's low contribution limits or, you have an instance where once the child reaches the age of majority, it legally becomes theirs and you can't do anything about it. So if they want to go out and buy, whatever they want to buy, brand new vehicle, or just blow it, in fucking Vegas with Cube Crusher, whatever, they can. And, the parent can't do anything about it. So, we want to try to maintain that control. And so we decided the second component or staple would be just having a brokerage account, but not having the brokerage account in the child's name. That's very, very important because you don't want it to count against them, again, on things like the FAFSA. So having a brokerage account in the parents' names in this case, but having it for stuff that might not necessarily be a qualified higher education expense. And the biggest thing that comes to mind is something like a vehicle. Even if it's a nice pre-owned vehicle or something, to get them around from point A to point B, to be able to purchase a vehicle or any other large ticket expense, we decided, hey, we're going to have another account that we are strictly going to fund. And pretty much that is going to be the purpose of the account, right? So that's number 2. And then finally, number 3, and I know this is probably an outlier, and a lot of people probably have no desire to do this, and some people think I'm probably crazy because we did this, but we actually bought our last turnkey rental property with the idea that we were purchasing it for our daughter. And so it's not in her name, and we don't plan to put it in her name, again, maintaining control. However, we will be teaching her about personal finance, as you might expect, as she gets a little bit older, and she'll have options in terms of what she wants to do essentially with that property as she gets older. So as rents continue to go up over time, tuition will likely continue to also go up over time. Maybe she decides she wants to use the cash flow from the property to supplement, income for her to pay for tuition. Maybe she says, the hell with this rental thing. Fuck it, Dad. I want to sell this thing and just take the cash and take the money and run. I'll probably try to talk her out of that, as will my wife. But, that is also an option if she chooses to do that. And then finally, kind of the best of both worlds in a way is there's nothing that says, hey, through principal pay down over the next, we'll say, 18 years, give or take a little bit, through principal pay down, right, is the tenants making rent payments and the mortgage payments are getting made and that principal is getting paid down and the equity in the property is building and hopefully the property is appreciating a little bit over time. There's going to be some built-in equity there. Even if, we didn't want to necessarily sell it, we could always do, depending on the rate environment and some other things at the time, a cash out refinance, which is not taxable. And basically just have the tenant continue to make the payments to pay that back down and pay that back off. In the meantime, we would have proceeds tax-free or a chunk of money, whatever we decided we wanted to do and she wanted to do. And that could be used for whatever she wants to use it for, for college or whatever the case might be. Still maintain control of the property, but now you've accessed a pool of funds, the debt equity that was trapped in the walls, and it's a non-taxable event because you're taking it out in the form of a loan. And as we've said before on the show, debt is not taxable. So that's kind of our combo strategy, at least at the moment, kind of what we're thinking about. So it's going to be a 529 college savings plan coupled for basically, college type expenses, coupled with a brokerage account for some educational type expenses like a vehicle. And then just to throw, number 3 in there would be the turnkey rental property to potentially fill in any gaps. So, that's kind of our thought process and how we're thinking about it and what we're doing. And, I thought maybe that would be of interest to folks to kind of just hear how this thing comes together. If I can ever get my buddies on the show, I'd love to hear what they're doing because I can tell you with almost 100% certainty they're not doing turnkey rentals. I would venture to guess they probably do have 529 college savings plans. I don't know if they are doing anything with a brokerage account. And in some cases, some people even use Roth IRAs for this purpose, which we're really not planning on doing that. And so, it would be interesting to get in a conversation with them if that ever should surface. If it does, we'll make sure to record that and get it out there at a later time. But in the event that never does happen, and I'm not holding my breath on it, I wanted to at least put this show out for you guys about 529 college savings plan basics. So hopefully, if you've never heard of a 529 plan before, you found this helpful. Again, you're going to put money into it. You're ultimately, hopefully, going to take the money out tax-free for higher education type of expenses. If you live in certain states, you can potentially get a state tax deduction. And, there's some safeguards. Like I said, if you end up with more money in the plan than you originally thought you were going to, and you don't have any other way to use it with the 529 rollover, although there are some strict rules as far as that goes. One great resource that I alluded to earlier that I would encourage everybody to check out. They have some really good articles. They do reviews on different types of plans in different states. It's called savingforcollege.com. So if you go to www.savingforcollege.com, feel free to check out that website. That should be useful to you. And one other thing, actually, I'm going to say, there are different types of 529 college savings plans, and this is very, very important, actually. There are direct plans, which is you go to the website, set it up, do everything yourself. Right? I think that's what 90+% of people should do. Okay. Then there are advisor or advisor sold plans. Those are where people like me get paid more than we should to set these up for you and take something that's fairly simple in nature and pretty much charge you a commission every time a contribution goes in. So what I would say is go to savingforcollege.com, check it out, and if you can, look for a good direct plan to open on your own where you can do everything yourself. And a lot of these, again, not a recommendation, but a lot of these are set up very similarly to like target date funds on retirement, right? So somebody might choose a target date fund that coincides around the year they might retire. Well, similarly, you can choose a college target date type of fund that coincides with the estimated time frame in which your child may attend college. So it's a very similar concept. There's also, you can build your own portfolio. Different providers have different setups. A lot of them will have index funds that are pretty cheap. You can get in there, but do it however you want, unless you are completely out to lunch and clueless, and don't take that the wrong way. But if you just say, you know what, this is important, it's not my thing, I just want to turn the reins over to somebody else. Okay, maybe you get an advisor sold plan. Personally, I hate these advisor sold plans. I don't like them. In the start of my career, I've done some of them before, but now I try to actually point people in a different direction and try to get clients to do it themselves. We can still talk about it and I can still help them, but it's going to save them some money. It's just a pain in the ass for me. It's too much paperwork for me. It's way too high of a commission rate, I think, for them. I don't really make that much on it anyway, and it's just better for everybody, in my opinion, to do the direct plans if you can. So what you don't typically want to do, if it were me, you don't want to walk into your local bank and go to their advisor in the branch and say, hey, I'd like to set up a college plan for Joe Schmo, because they're going to give you an advisor sold plan, and depending on how they set it up and the share class that you end up purchasing, you could be paying as much as 5.75% off the top for every contribution that you make. So in other words, you put in $100 and $94.25 gets invested. Well, you're already starting in the fucking hole, and you have a long way to go to dig yourself back out of that, even just to get back to, to even. So you're better off paying, if you have to, somebody that's like a fee only type of planner or fee based, somebody that will, set it up for you or kind of coach you through it if need be, without actually running it through them and purchasing it through them. Because if you end up with an advisor sold plan, it's, in my opinion, somewhat prohibitively expensive. Some clients don't give a shit and they already have other stuff with you, and they're like, you know what, Cash Flow King, you're my person and I don't care. I want you to do everything. And for those people, we'll do it. But again, I don't like doing it. And a lot of people are caught off guard. I've had people think that they go to the bank and they set it up and it's like free, like a bank account. And they don't realize until they get their statements and look at it, which most people don't, that, the advisor and the firm that's running it is taking 5%, give or take a little bit, off the top of every contribution. I just don't think that's right. So that's my opinion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, last week to become premium. If you'd like to be entered into the drawing for the Q3 $25 gift card giveaway, we're also going to do a much bigger one, probably again this year, going into the holiday season. So we appreciate our premium subscribers. You didn't hear any ads on today's episode. Thank a premium subscriber. If you don't know any or you're not one, become a premium subscriber. We really, really appreciate you. It's only $3 a month. It helps out the show, and you get some extra goodies. So until next time, we will see you in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.